Hello and good morning, everyone. Only Positivity here. I have my coffee with me, ready to kick off podcast number 25 on the series that I'm looking to launch called Elevated Thoughts. So, before diving into the book and everything like that for today, let's go ahead and start with a level set. So, as I endeavor upon pursuing knowledge and life experience in this next phase of life, through fitness, photography, traveling, much more. One habit that I've really formed is reading. So this podcast essentially goes through some of the books I've been reading as of late, taking those lessons learned and applying them to experiences in my life. So before diving into the book for today and the next topic, let's go ahead and start with the story. So, a little bit about me is, as of late, over the past 4 years or so, I've been having this really wanderlust type vibe, right? I love traveling. I've just been dabbling in it, in my opinion, but I really love traveling. I really love going places. Something about seeing new places, new people, new things, how they live their lives, is really humbling for me. So anyway, last week I actually had gone to the Porcupine National Park in Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, and it was amazing, right? It was a nice breath of fresh air being in nature, right? I grew up in Boy Scouts, I'm an Eagle Scout, so I've camped a lot throughout my life, and this was tent camping that we did, and it was really, really fun. We cooked over an open fire, all that stuff, right? And it was just really nice to be out in nature, see the stars. I don't know if you guys have been seeing my Instagram pictures and stuff like that. It was just a beautiful national park. We hiked for about 7, 8 miles, saw a lot of waterfalls, things like that. And the key takeaway for me from all of this was, we were really close to Canada, or in general, right? We went there, and everyone was just so nice to us, right? It was actually relatively crowded. Like, we all had our own space and our own campsites, but everyone was talking to everyone, right? When we would go fishing and we would come back with our poles, our neighbors would say, "Hey, did you guys catch anything?" They would ask us how the day went, how the hike went, and we would just have genuine, kind conversation, right? Um, and particularly in this one scenario, we were fishing. Me and a couple of my buddies, we were fishing, and the lake looked beautiful, right? And one of the pictures on my Instagram kind of shows a reflection of the trees above in the water. The water was extremely still. So all of a sudden, this older couple comes up to us, and they're like, "You guys, I have to take a picture of you guys. You guys this looks like a painting, right?" And at first, right, you realize how weary you are. And I live in Chicago, man. So like you realize how weary we are in Chicago, of strangers, right? And if like it's not worth our time, we don't engage, things like that, right? So, my first reaction, I'm not gonna lie, was like, okay, what are you guys doing? Like leave us alone, right? But my thought with that is, I'm just going to be nice if you're being nice. So they approached us with, kindness in their heart, and they were very innocent people, a very innocent older couple, and they took a few snaps of us. And when we got back, when we got signal, when we left the park, we got all these awesome pictures of us, and it was just a really refreshing interaction, right? All the way through going to the gas stations nearby, right? So it was 30 minutes to the nearest town. And every morning, right, like we're all particular about the way, right, we drop our deuces, for lack of a better phrase. So I assumed that the camp amenities were going to be dirty, right? So we drive 30 minutes every morning to the nearest town, for like 4 days straight. And every morning we walk in, like, three guys, right? We walk in, and by the second day, the staff at the gas station knew us. They're like, "All right, here come the shit boys," right? Like we go to the gas station, we grab some snacks, we get some coffee, and then we use the bathroom, right? And every morning they knew we were coming in to do that. But they were really kind about it. They were like, "Hey guys, just put on a fresh pot of coffee back there. Got some new cream flavors in." And I was like, "Damn, you guys are really, really nice to us, right? For people who are just coming and blowing up your bathroom like this." But in any case, right? A breath of fresh air to just have genuine, conversation with someone who, doesn't have any ulterior motive. And like I said, the whole trip was just a breath of fresh air in general, in all facets. So yeah, a beautiful time. I'd recommend anyone going out there. The campsite is very cheap to reserve. And so yeah, have fun with it. So anyway, let's come back to the book for today, right? And so we're going through the crime book, right? We're making our way through the different types of crime. Um, and today's topic is kidnapping and extortion. So, as I always say with this book particularly, it gave me a new perspective on crime, right? We often think that crime is just, hey, this person's bad, they committed a crime. But um, that can be true in many cases, but crime is a reaction to economics and economic circumstances, political policy, oppression, poverty, things like that. People are going to act out and try to rise above their current stature. So that being said, today's topic: kidnapping and extortion. So um, let's define it. So the book defines it as the illegal transportation of a non-consenting person through the use of force or fraud. And a couple, stats to kind of level set here. So in the UK, majority of kidnappings are committed by loved ones. So the first story we're going to go through is the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. And that took place in New Jersey in 1932. And there was actually a law that came out of this case called the Lindbergh Law. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But one thing to note is, right, so we saw with Bonnie and Clyde that there's complications that arise when we talk about what is a state crime versus a federal crime and who pursues it, right? In the early 1900s, there was no real federal law, and kidnapping was also not a federal law. And even with Bonnie and Clyde, we saw that federal authorities initially had a tough time pursuing Bonnie and Clyde across state lines. So we'll talk about how that manifests later. So we come back to the Lindbergh baby kidnapping in 1932. So just to paint the picture for you, so it was 10 p.m. on March 1st, 1932. So the Lindbergh family was a wealthy family. The dad, I believe his name was also Charles Lindbergh. Um, his wife, Anne Lindbergh, they were a wealthy couple who had a baby named Charlie. So they don't go into the specifics of why Charles was rich, but he was like an aviation pioneer. So he broke some record for flying like 36 hours straight, and at the time it was the longest flight, the longest recorded flight. So assuming they had some wealth from this, right? So anyway, so the nanny pokes her head into baby Lindbergh, so baby Charlie, right? Baby Charlie's nursery, and she realizes he's not there. The last time she checked on him was 2 hours prior. So, once the family finds out about this tragedy, they all run upstairs. They see an open window and a ransom note. So the ransom note demands $50,000, which in 1930 was a lot of money. But today, $50,000 is $900,000. So, um, just to paint that picture for you, but the whole family at that point was in a frenzy. Okay, so they start looking all over the grounds and all over the manor for this baby, right? And one thing to note about this is it was a crime scene, right? So when the kidnapping occurs, once they found the ransom note, they should have just called the police, in my opinion, because you don't know what you're trampling over, right? So the book even states that they probably trampled over or ruined a bunch of evidence through their own footprints or whatever, right? So just a little common sense there, I guess, or a little bit negligence. But one thing I can't say is how I would behave in that situation, right? I would probably be a little bit frantic as well. So anyway, moving forward. So they call the police eventually, and the police sets up roadblocks and checkpoints all over the area within like a X mile radius, right? So the police do a full investigation, and they ultimately determine that it was a kidnapping. So a couple of artifacts found near the scene. So the kidnapper used a homemade ladder, okay? And so that ladder was broken and was left about 75 feet away from the house. Now, if we talk about this ladder being broken, we know one, that they use it to climb into the window on the second floor where baby Lindbergh was. But some of the rungs on the ladder were broken, which means that they may have fell with the baby as they were climbing down. Maybe, right? We don't know for sure. So the police, they also found some tire tracks, and they found a chisel, with some traces of mud on it. And then the final clue was they found some footprints on the ground beneath the nursery leading away and to the main road. So, um, one thing that was considered negligence on behalf of the police force here was they never really took plaster casts of the footprints, right? They never took that outline back to the lab or anything like that, or compared it to anything. And this really would have given them a chance to compare prints with possible suspects, right? If anyone's in the system. Um, so the public gave them a lot of flack for missing that, right? While they were in this frantic search for the kidnappers. So on March 5th, another ransom note arrives and it demands $70,000, which is around 1.2 million today. So the note told the Lindberghs that they should keep the police out of it. And there was another note that followed that gave the Lindbergh family instructions on how to drop the money off. So we flash forward to Dr. John Condon, or Condone, however you want to pronounce it, right? So let's call him Dr. John. So Dr. John was a retired teacher who read about the kidnapping in the local paper, and he wrote a letter to the editor volunteering himself to be an intermediary between the Lindbergh and the kidnappers. Now that's weird, right? So this guy is just some guy who read about the kidnapping in the newspaper, and he decides that hey, I want to be involved in this. A little sketchy, maybe it's out of pure intention, but maybe a slight red flag there. So anyway, the kidnappers agreed, and they met Dr. John in a cemetery, where Dr. John received this pink sleeping suit that was Charlie's, right? And that was supposed to be proof that Charlie was still alive, right? Another red flag. The Lindberghs were then told to leave the money somewhere, right? They had a specific location as to where they were going to leave the money. So they were instructed that, okay, once you leave the money here, your baby is going to be left on a boat off of Martha's Vineyard, right, in Massachusetts, I believe. So Dr. John makes the drop, and the kidnappers do not follow through on their promise, right? So there was no boat to be found in the bay. The police conducted an extensive search with no results. So um, Charlie was eventually discovered, but he was discovered by chance. So mind you, right? So this kidnapping happened on March. So in May, a truck driver who had stopped for a bathroom break found a small body covered in leaves near a wooded area. Okay, and this was about um, 20, 30 minutes from the Limburg estate, right? So really close by. Um, so the body was buried in a shallow grave and had already begun to decay. So it seems like it had been there since the night of the killing. So medical examiners determined that that was baby Charlie, and he was killed with a blow to the head. So one piece of information they do throw out in the book is that the body was so decayed that they couldn't really tell if it was a boy or a girl. So it was kind of hard for me to understand how the medical examiners had deemed it was baby Charlie if you couldn't even figure out it was a boy or a girl, right? I get it, right? It's a baby, coincides with the case, but in my opinion, there was no full spectrum analysis done if they couldn't even determine it was a boy or a girl. But anyway, so there was some serious public outrage around this, right? Like we talked about before in terms of the negligence on behalf of law enforcement. So what Congress quickly did was enact the Lindbergh Law. So like we talked about with criminals, Bonnie and Clyde, this allowed federal authorities to pursue kidnappers across state lines. So flash forward to September of that year, money from the ransom actually turned up at a gas station in Manhattan. So this was back when gold was really in high commodity. So someone paid with a gold certificate at a gas station. So the clerk at the gas station took down the license plate, and then when that certificate that was used reached the bank, they found out it was part of the Lindbergh ransom. So the FBI goes forward. They trace the plates back to a German immigrant named Bruno Hauptmann, and he was a carpenter who lived in the Bronx. So they arrested him in September of 1934 with a $20 gold certificate that was also from the Lindbergh ransom. And then they go forward, they conduct a search, right? They get the warrant, and they found $14,000 of ransom money in this oil can behind some wooden boards in this guy's house, in his barn. So he said that he was hiding it for a friend named Isidore Fish, who had passed away. So this guy Fish was also German, and he actually had applied for a passport on the day that baby Charlie was kidnapped, right? So a little bit of a red flag there. So in Hauptmann's attic, they found a piece of pine wood that matched the ladder that was used for the kidnapping. And his handwriting was also a match to the ransom notes. Now, that's a little bit gray for me, right? Like you just found a piece of wood that matched. The handwriting one's a little bit more connecting. Um, but I don't know. It could be circumstantial. I'm not sure, right? They also didn't really do too much into this Fish guy who applied for his passport on the day that, baby Charlie was kidnapped. Not saying that Hauptmann is not guilty. Just seems like not enough to convict him at this point, I guess, in my opinion. So like I said, this was a big embarrassment on behalf of the FBI and other law officials, right? So they convicted Hoffman without substantial concrete evidence, and they seemed like they forced the verdict because there was a lot of public outrages, right? And they needed a conviction. So they couldn't get any solid details, and they also had no hard DNA evidence, right? Like for me, it's hard to convict someone if you don't have DNA evidence because things become circumstantial. So when I say circumstantial, um, that doesn't mean when you have a circumstantial case that it's a bad case, right? But like it's more solidified if you have DNA evidence tying an individual based on their genetic makeup, right? So anyway, so the governor of New Jersey at the time, he hired private investigators aside from the FBI and local law enforcement, and they also turned up with nothing. So, in any case, right, naturally, they sentenced Hopman to death, and he was executed. And like they never looked into that guy Isidore Fish, or that if it was a lady, I'm not sure. But his wife then tried to sue the state for $100 million and was unsuccessful. And there's been a lot of theories about what actually happened, but at this current point in time, we're no closer to finding out the truth, and I don't know if we ever will be. So, that wraps up the story for the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh. But you see, um, as criminals develop, so does the justice system. And things can fall through the cracks sometimes. And for the people that do fall through the cracks, it's very unfortunate, right, when the justice system fails them. But all in all, right, like as you develop something, you're going to go through some trial and error. I'm not taking any sides here, but I never condone the death penalty because it kind of it says it's okay for the state or the government to commit murder when they do it, but when someone else does it, it's not okay, right? So I mean, we don't want to go down that path right now. That's controversial, but just an interesting story, right? Food for thought here. So we wrap up the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh, and we move on to the kidnapping of John Paul Getty the third. So this took place in Rome, in Italy, right, in 1973. So about 40 years after the Lindbergh kidnapping. So Paul Getty was the son or the grandson of an oil billionaire, right? And they're all named John Paul Getty. So um, this is John Paul Getty the third who was kidnapped, and I guess John Paul Getty Sr. was the billionaire, the oil billionaire. So, right, so you can tell John Paul Getty III was a spoiled kid, right? He was living this like crazy, lavish, bougie, bohemian lifestyle, and he was 16 years old, and he grew up in Rome, Italy. So, right, he was known as being kind of a wild child, right? So, anyway, in July of 1973, he was captured during a night out, right, a drunken night out with one of his friends, or a few of his friends. So, like I said, he was pinned as kind of a wild child. So a lot of people initially thought that he staged this kidnapping for the money, right? So ultimately, what actually happened was he was driven into Calabria over 250 miles by his kidnappers. And they had always kept him on the move, right? So they were organized. They changed his location so they could never pin him down. So the kidnappers, they also forced him to write a letter to his parents, letting them know of the situation. So what happened was they made him write in that note that if his parents did not pay the $18 million ransom, they would cut off one of his fingers. So pretty dark there, right? And something we might see with the mafia, right? Like just the brutality of it all. So um, Paul's father was not convinced, and he hired a private investigator. So um, John Paul Getty III wrote another note saying that, okay, you guys have 15 days to gather this money. Otherwise, they're going to receive an envelope with locks of Paul's hair and his ear. So, Paul's mom at that point kind of made haste. Okay, so she starts gathering the money and things like that, and she says she's gonna meet him. But when the day comes, she doesn't show up, which we don't know why that happened. The book doesn't go into it, but that's pretty bogus, right? That's pretty bogus. If she doesn't show up for her son like that. So then, flash forward. A couple of weeks later, there's a newspaper in Italy or in Rome called the Messaggero, right? Um, and they received a package that contained Paul's hair and also his right ear, which is super gruesome. Um, so then the captors they threatened to remove the other ear unless they were paid 3.2 million in 10 days. So they changed the sum, right? It goes from 18 to 3.2. So another package comes in from these guys, from the captors, with Paul's photos um, and showing Paul's face completely scarred up, right? So at this point, things are getting serious, right? Like you know that they're not bluffing anymore. So um, John Paul Getty's grandfather, the billionaire, finally forks over the money. Okay, so Paul's released. When the police pick him up, he looks malnourished. He looks weak. He looks fair. From the blood loss when his left or his right ear was severed. Right. So ultimately, the police arrest 9 men associated. Right, and they're associated with the Calabrian mafia, like we were talking about before. So we talk about the 3.2 million that was given. Only 85,000 of that was recovered. So only a small sum, a fraction of it. So John Paul Getty III, he moves to New York, and he had a son. And they say he never recovered from this incident. Um, and then he ultimately turned to a life of alcoholism and drug addiction, which is very, very sad. In 1981, um, he suffered a stroke from a cocktail of drugs, right? And that ultimately left him paralyzed, blind, and ultimately speechless, right? So you see a really, really sad outcome coming for John Paul Getty, a guy who was a kid who was a bit of a wild child, but had all the buildup of someone who possibly could do something down the road, right? With all the resources of his grandfather, and things like that. It's not his fault that money spoiled him, right? He was brought up that way. But anyway, so ultimately his mother and father got divorced, and his mom had to sue his dad for money to manage the medical costs. And then later, John Paul Getty III and his wife divorced, and he died at his home in London at the age of 54 years old. And one of the saddest things about this story is kind of the what money can do to relationships and whatnot. So it was said that I'm sure this whole experience for John Paul Getty was humbling in some ways, right? And so it was said that he tried to call his grandfather and say thank you for paying his ransom, but his grandfather would not talk to him anymore. And that's really sad, right? Because um, I don't know the situation, but it doesn't seem like he wasn't purposefully kidnapped, right? He might have been a spoiled guy, things like that, but he's 16 years old. Like what does he know, right? But to shun someone because of money like that, even though this guy was a billionaire, what's 3.2 million to him, right? He refused to talk to his son anymore. I'm sure It caused some type of divorce between his mom and dad. Ultimately, the whole family just fell apart because of this. When in reality, in my mind, it should bring them together, right? Let's like love each other more. We know how short life can be now, but yeah, just a good example of how money can really screw a situation up big time. So we wrap that up, the kidnapping of John Paul Getty III, and we move forward to our last story for today, right? And that's going to be the kidnapping of Natasha Kampusch, which took place in Vienna, Austria in 1998. So, painting the picture for you here. So, on March 2nd, 1998, 10-year-old Natasha Kampusch was walking from her house in Vienna to her school. Okay, so 10 years old. That's she's probably in fifth grade. Okay, um, so as she's walking, there's an unemployed telecoms engineer. His name's Wolfgang Prick, Pricklopil, right? So I don't know, let's call him Wolfgang, right? Because his last name is super complicated. So Wolfgang kidnaps her right off the street, supposedly with another guy. Okay, so um, and put her in his van. He had this like white stereotypical like creeper van, um, and drove her to his house, which is 30 minutes away. So a nearby witness, it was a 12-year-old, witnessed the kidnapping by two guys, two men. But the witness alerted the police right away, and there was a massive search of about 800 vehicles in the neighboring areas that were searched. So at this point, Wolfgang's vehicle was not searched, but the police approached his house. So just as a precursor, he was 44 at the time of this. He told police he was alone at home during the time of the abduction. He said the van was used for a construction project on his house, and then he was questioned no further, and his vehicle was not searched. So Natasha was kept captive for a total of 8 years, right? So we talk about from being captive from ages 10 to 18, which is are very formative years for anyone, right? You think about going from fifth grade all the way to being a senior in high school. There's so much growth that happens for a young person in that age gap, right? You pretty much go from being a child to an adult in that time. Not to mention all of the activities that we do, right? Like, I played soccer, I was in Boy Scouts, I traveled a little bit, made close relationships with friends that I still talk to now, right? All those things were unavailable for Natasha as soon as she got captured and held captive for 8 years. So, um, they say that where she was held in Wolfgang's house was a well hidden spot, that it almost took him an hour to get inside that spot, which is, how difficult was it to actually get there, right? They just said it was underneath his garage, in a crawl space underneath his garage where she was kept in this room. So the room had no lights in it, no windows, and no bathroom really. And he would tell her that he had a gun, and if you tried to escape, I'll shoot you. Or he said the doors were set to explode if you tried to escape. Now, for you might think that, hey, dude, okay, why not just try it? Why not just get out, right? But like for a kid, when they're told things by an adult, they're very susceptible to those types of things. So she probably truly thought that these things were explosive, right? Even an adult would think so. But um, when you tell a child something, they're more likely to take it as truth, right? I think about like when you see a dog who's run through like a screen and now they're afraid to go through it again, even though the door might be open, right? They've been traumatized by that one event, so they don't want it to happen again, right? So anyway, he would start beating her as she got older and got more rebellious. He would starve her, and he would keep her in darkness for extended periods of time. Um, so he also made her clean his house, and he would even take her outside sometimes, and she was too afraid to run away or even reach out to people she encountered. So imagine he's got her out on the street sometimes, and she's staying silent, right? She's staying extremely silent, not reaching out to people out of the fear of being killed. So We flash forward to 2006. Um, so Natasha's 18 now, and Wolfgang asks her to vacuum his car in the yard. So he lets her out. Hey, clean my car. So he goes inside to take a call for a second, and she uses that time to finally escape. So she sprints down the street. She asks for anyone nearby. Hey, help me, help me, help me. Can you call the police? Anything. And what's funny about that is a lot of people actually didn't help her at first, right? And you think about that whole group thing situation, right? Like if I was outside and I was in a group of people and I saw two dudes starting to fight, like I personally would probably break that fight up or try to like, get people off so no one gets hurt. But a lot of people might stand by too, right? I might stand by. I don't know, right? It's hard to put yourself in that situation, right? But ultimately, coming back to the story, somebody did call the police, um, and then she was taken away, right? And once Wolfgang realized that this situation had occurred, he goes over to a friend's house and he says, "You know what? I'm a kidnapper and I'm a rapist." And they don't connect the rape to Natasha. They never explicitly say in the book that he raped her. But he confessed that he's a rapist, which is, terrible. So he says to his friend, "Hey, I'm a kidnapper and I'm a racist." And then what he does is he walks out to the train tracks and jumps in front of a train, and was pronounced dead. So then after that, I'm sure they don't really go into how Natasha like re-assimilated back into society or how her family took her, anything like that. But she did write a book called 396 Days, kind of going through her life in captivity. And I might even pick up that book. It could be a very interesting read. But there's a movie on Netflix kind of along those lines, called Room or something like that. And the trauma that just comes from being in captive, and things like that is something I could even fathom, right? Those who are kept in solitary for extended periods of time, they probably do survive, but it probably takes a very serious toll on your mind as well as your body. So, some really interesting stories for today, guys. I hope you guys are enjoying everything that I'm going through. Like I said, feel free to leave me any feedback. I'm always open to it. And yep, remember, only positivity. Have a good one, guys.